أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد السيد المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we have invited Kamal Hussein, who is a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir, to address one of the most important issues which is facing the Islamic Ummah in this day. And today he will discuss the subject matter and the question of what is the method to establish the Khilafah state, the Islamic state. Kamal.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن سيدنا محمدا عبده ورسوله الذي أدى الأمانة وبلغ الرسالة وجاهد في الله حتى أتاه اليقين. وقال المولى عز وجل في القرآن الحكيم قل هذه سبيلي أدعو إلى الله على بصيرة أنا ومن اتبعني. صدق الله العظيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Brothers, the topic we are discussing today is the subject of the methodology of re-establishing the Khilafah. Now, I think we'll all agree that Muslims, they all accept that we need to work for Islam, that Islam is the solution, that we need to bring back Islam politically. However, one thing which is not clear is the subject of the method, how this is to be done. So today, inshallah, we're going to discuss the topic of the method of re-establishing the Khilafah from the Sharia text. Now, before we do that, it's important, I think, to discuss the aim as well, not just the method, and to show the importance and the significance of this aim and the obligation that is upon every Muslim. If we look at the reality today, we'll find that the Muslim Ummah is divided into more than 50 states. If we look at the Ummah today, we'll find that the Muslim Ummah is being attacked from left, right and center from all directions by the kuffar. Only recently we have seen what has taken place in Iraq, and we have a string of lands which have been usurped by the kuffar in Palestine, Kashmir and many other places. Also, we find that the Muslim Ummah, even though we have been blessed with the resources, we suffer from poverty, we suffer from our affairs being not being looked after. We suffer from the fact that rulers look after the affairs of their masters, the West, and they do not look after the affairs of the Ummah. So, why is that? See, this reality exists simply because we do not have ruling by what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed. This reality exists simply because we do not implement the solutions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all of these problems. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given a solution for the disunity. So the fact that we are divided, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said, إِذَا كُنْتُمْ جَمِيعًا فَأَتَاكُمْ مَنْ يُفَرِّقُكُمْ جَمَاعَتُكُمْ فَاضْرِبُوهُ كَائِنًا مَنْ كَانَ. That if you are united under one man and someone came to divide you, then kill him, whoever he is. So the hadith indicates to us the manner of our unity, which is through one imam. The fact that we are attacked and that our blood is not protected and our honor is not protected. The Prophet ﷺ clarified in the hadith when he said, إِنَّمَا الْإِمَامُ جُنَّةٌ يُقَاتَلُ مِنْ وَرَائِهِ وَيُتَّقَى بِهِ. That verily the Imam is a shield behind whom you fight and gain your protection. Today we do not have that protection because of the absence of that Imam. The fact that our affairs are not being looked after, that we suffer, whether in terms of education, poverty, economically, in all regards, in social aspect, is because there is no Imam. As the Prophet said, Al-Imamu ra'in fahuwa mas'ulun an ra'iyatih. That the Imam is the shepherd, is the one who looks after the affairs of the people. Today we have those rawabida, those people who look after the affairs of the West, not the Muslims. And that is why we're in such a mess as an ummah. So, that means that ourselves, we realize that our salvation or rescue from this misery is the solution of working for the Khilafah al-Rashida. And this Khilafah al-Rashida is not a matter of history, but rather is actually an obligation on every neck. And this is a matter which is not disputed amongst the scholars, but agreed upon whatever madhahib one may belong to. If we look at the evidence for the obligation of Khilafah, it's clear. The Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they delayed the burial of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even though he said, he said 3 things, do not delay. إذا مات أحدكم فلا تحبسوه تصرعوه إلى قبره. That if one of you dies, do not hold on to him, but rather rush to his burial. Even though the Prophet ﷺ, he said this, we find that the Sahaba, they delayed the burial of the Prophet ﷺ himself, which indicates to us that this is an obligation. Otherwise, how could the Sahaba neglect the obligation of burying the Prophet ﷺ, if it was not the case that the presence of a Khalifa is an obligation which is more important and takes precedence over that obligation? You see, brothers, this understanding of the ijma' is well understood by the ulama, and this is well established amongst the ulama. Ibn al-Hajar al-Haythami, he said, اعلم أيضا أن الصحابة رضوان الله عليهم أجمعوا على أن نصب الإمام بعد انقراض زمن النبوة واجب. He said, know that the Sahaba radiallahu anhum had an ijma', that they all agreed that appointing an imam after the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, after inqirad zaman al-nubuwah, after the end of the prophethood, he said it's wajibun. Bal ja'aluhu ahammul wajibat. Not only a wajib, not only obligation, but rather they made it one of the most important of obligations. Why? حيث اشتغلوا به عن دفن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Because they were preoccupied in appointing a Khalifa, and that made them delay the burial of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which indicates that their ijma' on this obligation, and this obligation is one of the most important. Many scholars, Imam al-Qurtubi, he said, لا خلاف في وجوب ذلك بين الأمة ولا بين الأئمة. He said there is no difference of opinion regarding this obligation, whether in terms of the Ummah or the A'imma, i.e. the Imams, Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi'i, and so Imam al-Nawawi, he said, وَأَجْمَعُوا عَلَىٰ أَنَّهُ يَجِبُ عَلَى الْمُسْلِمِينَ نَصْبُ خَلِيفَةٍ. He said that there is ijma' amongst the Muslims that appointing a Khalifa is an obligation. Imam Ibn Hazm al-Zahiri, just to show you the unanimity on this subject, right? There is no difference of opinion. He said, اتفق جميع أهل السنة وجميع المرجئة وجميع الشيعة وجميع الخوارج على وجوب الإمامة وأن الأمة واجب عليها انقياد لإمام عادل يقوم فيهم أحكام الله. He said, and he brought in all of the schools of, not just the recognized schools of thought, even the Shia, even the other schools. He said, the اتفق أهل Sunnah agree, the Shia agree, the Murji'ah agree, the Khawarij even agree, all of them agree that it's an obligation on the Ummah to appoint an Imam. To do what? يقيم فيهم أحكام الله, who will apply the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ويسوسهم بأحكام الشريعة التي أتى بها رسول الله, and that their affairs will be looked after by the Sharia that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has brought. So this is an obligation over which there is no dispute. Now coming to the actual methodology by which the Khilafah should be established. First point is, before we discuss how it should be done, we need to have some understanding how it should not be done. Because we see from the reality today that people follow an incorrect or a weak methodology in this regard. So what we should not do is make up the method as we go along. So we shouldn't say from our mind that this is the way to establish Khilafah. It should be like this, and alter as we go along. And what we should not do, adopt a haram means and then bring text to justify it. That is not the way. But rather what we need to do is refer to the Sharia. We need to go back to the text to tell us how this obligation is going to be fulfilled. Like any other obligation, whether salah or hajj or zakah or jihad, we go to the text. Here also we need to refer to the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. is not an old matter which has been discussed by the scholars, because the ulama never found themselves in a situation where the Khilafah did not exist. Only the Sahaba were in that situation, and the Prophet was in that situation, and they established the first Islamic state. So today we find ourselves in a unique situation where the method to re-establish the Khilafah is not being discussed by the scholars. So what that means now is that ourselves, we need to make ijtihad, that we need to go to the text and derive the Sharia methodology, because this is not a matter which has been discussed by the scholars of old. Now, what is ijtihad? Ijtihad is to understand the reality, the problem or the mas'ala, and then to go to the relevant text relating to that issue and to extract the hukum. Now, what is the mas'ala or the issue that we ourselves find ourselves in? The mas'ala or the issue is that we live in Darul Kufr, that the Muslim lands today are not a land of Islam, i.e. where the authority of Islam that is not in the hands of the Muslims and the rules of Islam are not applied. So this is the mas'ala. Now we want to change that into Darul Islam, where the authority is in the hands of the Muslim and the Islamic rules are applied. Now for that, we need to go to the relevant text to see how that is done. Now the relevant text is the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because it was only in his time, the time of the revelation, that the Islamic state was established. Therefore we need to make iqtida, emulation of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and follow his way of how he established the state. Because the hadith is clear when he says, Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli, that pray as you see me pray. وَخُذُوا عَنِّي مَنَاسِكَكُمْ, you make the manasik, the rites of Hajj, as you see me make it. That means that all the obligation, we need to refer to Rasulullah to show us how it is done. And da'wah, carrying the da'wah and re-establishing the Islamic state is no exception to that rule. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, قُلْ هَذِهِ سَبِيلِي أَدْعُو إِلَى اللَّهِ عَلَى بَصِيرَةٍ أَنَا وَمَنِ اتَّبَعَنِي. Say, O Prophet, that this is my way, that I call to Allah on awareness, ala basiratin, myself and those who follow me. Abu Bakr al-Jassas, the great Hanafi scholar, he said this ayah, he said, فيه دلالة على أن على المسلمين دعاء الناس إلى الله تعالى كما كان على النبي. He said this is an indication from this ayah that the Muslim need to carry the da'wah as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself he carried it, that we are obliged to follow his example. So let's go to the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and let us see how he changed Darul Kufr into Darul Islam. When we study his life, from the point in which he started the da'wah until the establishment of the Islamic State in Medina, we find that he undertook certain specific actions, right, in realizing that aim of establishing the Islamic State. And these specific actions are what we are obliged to follow. What did he do? In brief, what he did was, there was two stages we find in the Prophet ﷺ life. One is the cultural stage, where he formed a group, right, and he established a group and he cultured this group. And the second stage is the stage of interaction, where the group went out into society and challenged the dominant thoughts and challenged the rulers to transfer the authority, from to change the authority from the rulers and to bring it in the hands of Islam. And thirdly, we find in that stage that the Prophet ﷺ, he sought the Nusra. Inshallah, we're going to go into each of this stage in more detail. In terms of the cultural stage, when the ayah was revealed, Ya ayyuhal muddathir, qum fa'anzir, O thou wrapped up in the garments. Remember when the revelation came and the Prophet ﷺ came to Khadija and said, Zammiluni, cover me. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addressed him, O the one who is wrapped up in his garments, qum, stand, arise, fa'anzir, and warn the people. And that was the beginning of the da'wah. So we find that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he contacted those who were around him, those in whom he found some receptibility, those who would receive the Islamic da'wah, right? And he invited them. So for example, Khadija radiallahu anha, Bakr radiallahu anhu, he invited them and they embraced Islam. And he invited others and they started to come, into the group of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he cultured them in Darul Arqam ibn Abi Arqam. Because why? Because he wants to take this group out into society. He wants to change society. He wants to change the thoughts and ideas, and he wants to change the authority in the society. So therefore his kutla, or his group, his structure must be strong. So we find that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he cultured his Sahaba. He strengthened their nafsiyah, and he strengthened their their mentality and their disposition and their taqwa and their iman and their adherence to Islam, such that he can take them out into the da'wah. And we find he did this for a number of years until the ayah was revealed to say that they were ready. So when the ayah was revealed, فَاسْتَعْ بِمَا تُؤْمَرْ وَأَعْرِضْ عَنِ الْمُشْرِكِينَ إِنَّا كَفَيْنَاكَ الْمُسْتَهْزِئِينَ. O Prophet, proclaim openly what you've been commanded, and turn away from the mushrikeen. And Inna kafaynaka lil mustahzi'in. Do not worry about those who scoff and mock, for we are enough, and we will deal with them. So we find in the first stage, the Prophet, he formed a group and he cultured them. So we find from that this work is a collective work. That is the lesson that we draw from that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he did not work on his own, but rather he worked as a group, and he formed a group. So even from our reality, we can see that an individual can never change the reality, but rather it needs to be a collective work. So that's why from the Sharia principle, مَا لَا يَتِمُّ الْوَاجِبْ بِهِ إِلَّا بِهِ فَهُوَ وَاجِبْ, that it's obligation to bring back Islam. And if through the collective work that this can be done, then the collective work becomes an obligation. In the second stage, we find that the Prophet ﷺ, in the interaction stage, when he went out into society with his group, he engaged in 3 activities. One is the intellectual struggle, second is the political struggle, and third, the seeking of the nusra. In the intellectual struggle, he struggled against the dominant thoughts and ideas in Quraysh. So Quraysh, they believed in idols. Rasulullah ﷺ, he attacked this when the ayah was revealed. إِنَّكُمْ وَمَا تَعْبُدُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ حَسَبُ جَهَنَّمْ, that you and what you worship is a fuel for the hellfire. The Quraysh, they engaged in evil practices, such as burying their daughters alive. So the ayah was revealed, إِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ, that when the girl who is buried alive shall be asked, for what sin were you buried alive? The Quraysh, they used to engage in cheating in the marketplaces. So the ayah was revealed, وَيْلٌ لِلْمُطَفِّفِينَ, woe to those who fraud or change the scales. So we find that da'wah at that time attacked the dominant thoughts and ideas in society, and that da'wah was frank and open. Right? So for example, in the ayah it says, وَإِنَّا, the Prophet was told to say, وَإِنَّا وَإِيَّاكُمْ لَعَلَى هُدًى أَوْ فِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. Right? That verily either we or you are rightly guided, not both. So either you're in manifest error or we are. Meaning the da'wah is blatant, that you are in manifest error. So there's no flattery of the rulers, but rather it's a challenging da'wah. So the Prophet, he engaged in this intellectual struggle with society. What else? He also engaged in the political struggle against the rulers of the time. So we all know, for example, the surah تَبَّتْ يَدَا أَبِي لَهَبٍ وَتَبٍ مَا أَغْنَى عَنْهُ مَالُهُ وَمَا كَسَبْ, that perished be the hands of Abu Lahab. And brothers, this ayah was revealed when Rasulullah ﷺ, he went up on the mountain and he invited all the tribes to Islam. And before that he said to them, look, if I tell you that there is a caravan preparing to attack you, would you believe me? And they said yes. And so he warned them of the azab of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he invited them, at which point Abu Lahab, he said, Tabban laka ya Muhammad, perish be you, O Muhammad. And the response to that was this ayah, Tabbat yada Abi Muhammad wa Abi Lahabin wa tab, that perish be the two hands of Abu Lahab and perish he. So strong language, and this is attacking the ruler of the time by, not just, there's other ayahs which implicitly mention the rulers. In this ayah, Abu Lahab was one of the chiefs. He is mentioned in the ayah. So Tabbat yada Abu Lahab, Tabbat yada Abi Lahab, perish be the hands of Abu Lahab. So we find that the Prophet ﷺ, he engaged in this struggle, and the Quraysh, they knew it. They knew that the Prophet ﷺ wanted to change the authority and the power. That is why Ibn Ishaq, he says that the Quraysh, when they saw the da'wah continuing and progressing, and it became more difficult for them, the Quraysh, that they then said to each other, they said, Inna Hamza wa Umar qad aslama. Umar and Hamza, they've embraced Islam. This is what Quraysh are saying to each other. وَقَدْ فَشَ أَمْرُ مُحَمَّدْ فِي قَبَائِلِ قُرَيْشِ, and Muhammad's matter, his call is spreading throughout the tribes of Quraysh. كُلُّهَا فَانْطَلِقُوا بِنَا إِلَى أَبِي طَالِبٍ. So let's go to Abu Talib. And then they said, فَلْنَأْخُذُ عَلَى إِبْنُ أَخِي وَلْيَأْتِهِ مِنَّا وَاللَّهِ مَا نَأْمَنُ أَنْ يَبْتَزُونَ أَمْرَنَا. He said, by Allah, this Muhammad, he wants to take our power. يَبْتَزُونَ أَمْرَنَا. He wishes to seize the power from us. So the Quraysh, they knew. And the Prophet ﷺ, he did attack the rulers intellectually, because he wanted to sever that link between the rulers and the people. So that is the second aspect of the work to re-establish Khilafah. First is to work collectively in a group. Second is that this group needs to engage in the dominant force and ideas of society. At that time, the beliefs were of Hubal and Lat. Today's reality, or the dominant force and ideas, is not Hubal and Lat and Manat and Uzza, but rather is democracy, rather is freedom, rather is nationalism, rather is the criteria of benefit. Rather is the UN. These are the dominant thoughts that exist today, and therefore in emulation of Rasulullah, we need to attack these thoughts and disprove these thoughts. And also we need to account the rulers as the Prophet ﷺ, he accounted the ruler. So these are the obligations of the group, to work, that this work is a collective work, and that this society engages with this group engages with society's thoughts and ideas. What else? Another important aspect of the method to re-establish Khilafah is the means or the mechanism by which to transfer the authority from the existing status quo to in the hands of the Muslims, such that Islam can be applied. And that way is the secret of the Nusra. The Prophet ﷺ, he sought Nusra, i.e. power, material power from the tribes. It is narrated that after Khadija radiallahu anha and Abu Talib died, that the Prophet ﷺ, he went to At-Ta'if seeking the Nusra. And not only that, Ibn Sa'ad in his Tabaqat, he mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ, in seeking the Nusra, he went to 15 tribes, no less than 15 tribes. So he went to Banu Amir ibn Sa'sa'a, Ibn Muharib, Banu Fazzara, Banu Ghassan, Banu Murra, Banu Hanifa, Banu Salim, Banu Abbas, Banu Nadr, Banu Al-Buka, Banu Kinda, Banu Kalb, Banu Al-Harith ibn Ka'ab, Banu Uzza, Banu Al-Hadrama. So you see the Prophet ﷺ, in seeking the material power, he went to so many tribes, which indicates the obligation, because the continuity of that task indicates that this action that he did was an obligation. So what did he do? He went to these tribes and he said, Ya Bani Fulan wa Fulan, oh so and so tribe, tamni'uni kama tamni'un. He said, protect me, give me the man'a, give me the nusra. Why? لِكَيْ أُبَلِّغَ رِسَالَاتَ رَبِّي, so that I may convey the message that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to me. And the Prophet, he went to so many tribes, and the tribes knew what the Prophet was after. So for example, when he went to Banu Amir ibn Sa'sa'a, they were willing to accept Rasulullah, but one thought occurred to them, that okay, we'll give him power, but who's going to have power after him? So they said to Rasulullah, عَلَى مَنْ خَالَفَكَ, Ya Rasulullah, after us, after we give you the power, right, when you become dominant and you have power, عَلَى مَنْ خَالَفَكَ, who will follow you? Who will succeed you in power? They wanted to put a condition on the nusra they were giving. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Innal amra biyadillahi yada'uhu haythu yasha." He said, this matter, this power is in the hands of Allah, and He will place it wherever He wills. So it was very clear. When they knew why Rasul was here, and Rasul was very clear in terms of what he wanted from them. So finally, the Prophet ﷺ, he met. He went to so many of these tribes. Some of them rejected him, some of them he rejected because they put conditions. So finally he met the Aus and Khazraj from Medina, 12 men from the Aus and Khazraj, and he invited them to Islam, and they embraced Islam. But they weren't enough to give the nusra. So the Prophet ﷺ, he sent them back to Medina with Mus'ab ibn Umair, who was called the Muqri, the reciter. And he would, in Medina, recite the Quran and invite them. And his da'wah went so well to the extent that the following year, he came back with 73 men from the Aus and Khazraj and 2 women. And amongst them were those who had authority in Medina. And these people, they gave the Prophet ﷺ the bay'ah, i.e. they transferred the authority and the power from Medina, right, to the Rasulullah ﷺ at the Bay'atul Aqaba al-Thaniya, at the second Bay'ah of Aqaba. And this took place at night. And the Prophet ﷺ, again, he was very, the Sahaba, the Ansar, they knew very clearly what the Prophet ﷺ was after. That's why one of them, he said to the Prophet ﷺ, he said, بَعْدَ أَنْ أَظْهَرَكَ اللَّهِ هَلْ تَدِعْنَا? He said, Ya Rasulullah, we'll give you the bay'ah. But after بعد أن أظهرك الله, after Allah makes give you the idhar, idhar al-deen, makes the deen dominant, makes you dominant. هل تدعنا? You're going to leave us? He said, no, بل الدم والدم. He said, no, the blood is paid for by blood. I am from you, and you are from me. أُصَالِمُ مَنْ سَالَمْتُمْ وَأُحَارِبُ مَنْ حَارَبْتُمْ. I will make peace with whom you make peace, and I will make war with whom you make war. So it was very clear that the Bay'ah al-Aqaba al-Thaniya was about the transfer of power, and indeed that is what happened. So the third aspect of the method of Rasulullah is that he sought nusra. And in today's reality, it's not the tribes who have power today. It is not families which have power, but rather it's the armies and the military. So really this group, in emulation of Rasulullah ﷺ, it needs to seek nusra amongst the army in the Muslim countries, so as to transfer the authority from the existing status quo to the hands of the Muslims, such that Islam can be implemented. So brothers, this is the example of the Prophet ﷺ. He formed a group, and therefore the part of the methodology is that this work is not individual work, but is work with a political party, with a group, to work collectively in society, where this group would attack the dominant force and ideas, right, to change the public opinion in the society, and as well to challenge the rulers, such as to sever that link between the rulers and the ruled, and also to seek the nusra and the material power, such that that transference of authority can take place. And what does that mean for us? See, this is an obligation, not only for a group, but rather this is an obligation from all Muslims. And ourselves, if we do not undertake this, what are the consequences? The Prophet ﷺ was very clear when he talked about the consequences of neglecting this work, when he said, مَنْ مَاتَ وَلَيْسَ فِي عُنُقِهِ بَيْعَ مَاتَ مِيتَةً جَاهِلِيَّةً. The one who dies without a bay'ah on his neck, i.e. without the presence of a Khalifa, he will die the death of Jahiliyyah. And brothers, you know that ourselves, we wish to die as Muslims. That's what Allah says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ حَقَّ تُقَاتِهِ وَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. That all Muslims fear Allah as He should be feared, and do not die except as Muslims. And ourselves, we strive to say the kalima before we die. But the Prophet, he said that the one who dies without the bay'ah on his neck is as if he's died in the days of Jahiliyyah. So that is the consequence. But another point to note in terms of working to resume the Islamic way of life is that it is a privilege also, not only an obligation. Because brothers, Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi, he never had this privilege. Imam Malik never had this privilege. None of the ulama or the great personalities in Islam had this privilege of working to establish time Khilafah exists. The only time it did not exist was in Rasulullah's time. So the path that we follow, this path, is actually the path that Rasulullah took, and only the Sahaba took, and no one else. So we are in following the footsteps of Rasulullah, and we are following the footsteps of the Sahaba radwanullahi alayhim ajma'een. And it's a privilege to work and an honor to work for this deen and to work in this path. And finally, this matter is something which has been promised to us. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, ثُمَّ تَكُونُ الْخِلَافَةَ عَلَى مِنْهَاجِ النُّبُوَّةِ, that indeed the Khilafah will come, that the Khilafah will come back on the way of the prophethood. So the promise is there. The point is that we need to take up that promise and engage in the work. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله العظيم.
جزاك الله خير. Brothers, you now have an opportunity, inshallah, to ask some questions related to the subject matter, the method to establish the Khilafah, to re-establish the Islamic State. If there are any questions, you can raise your hands, inshallah. It's the brother in the second row.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers. I just want to ask a question, is Hizb ut-Tahrir working to establish the Khilafah in UK?
Okay. The work to establish the Khilafah is an obligation wherever you are. There's 2 points here. One is in terms of the obligation. This obligation applies to all, right? Because it is not place bound or time bound. The hadith says, "Man mata wa laysa fi unuqihi," the one who dies without a bay'ah on his neck, without a Khalifa present. And the text did not specify your place or your time. Whenever you die, wherever you die, whenever death comes to you, you should not die without a Khalifa being present. So this obligation is wherever you are. Just like you should need to fast if you live in the West, you need to pray if you live in the West, and you need to work to establish Khilafah if you live in the West. Similarly, however, in terms of where the Khilafah is going to be established, we take example again from Rasulullah and Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. We find that he did not work everywhere, but rather he focused his work in a certain nucleus or area, right? And he established the Khilafah there and the Islamic State there, and thereafter the state expanded. So in emulation of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, we ourselves designate a majal or an area of work, and that area of work is the Muslim lands where the Muslims reside. It is not in the West, although the Islam will come to the West through da'wah and jihad. So the nucleus of the work is, and the focus of the work is the Muslim countries. Why? Because Rasulullah selected a land to fight those he had power, but Rasulullah did not seek nusra from him. He was not from Mecca. He did not ask him to establish Islamic State where he was, but rather he focused in Mecca. So ourselves, we focus in an area, and naturally our work is going to be in the areas where people are already Muslims, in the Muslim lands, where the Muslims are obliged to re-establish Islam. So yes, working to resume Islamic way of life is an obligation wherever you are, but the methodology dictates that it is in a specific area, and the area that we've designated is the Muslim lands.
Sorry, the brother at the back.
Assalamu alaikum. You mentioned in your talk that we use the example of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as an example for us in understanding the method to re-establish the state. Is the Seerah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam a valid source for us, and is it applicable in today's reality?
Okay, Jazakallah khair. First of all, we need to realize what is the Seerah. You see, hadith works of various types, right? Some, so if you look at the Sahih Sitta, right, their role, if you like, or those books, right, or hadith works are about detailing every single aspect of the Sunnah, right, and they've been divided according to certain abwab, so certain chapters. So Babul Jihad, Babul Imara, Babul Wudu, Babul Fara'id, the chapter on Wudu, chapter on Istinja, chapter on Salah, chapter on Hajj, right, along various topics. They're not chronological, you see. But we have other works of hadith, right, which are chronological, which detail the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and these works are called the Seerah works. And the Seerah works have been written by some of the greatest scholars like Ibn Ishaq, rahmatullahi alayh, like Ibn Sa'ad, his tabaqat, like Ibn Hisham, right? And these are scholars of hadith, right, who actually wrote down the life of Rasulullah in a chronological form, and they followed the same method in terms of isnad as the hadith works, but the difference is chronology. You see, so if you go to the Seerah Ibn Hisham, right, we'll find that every incident that we mentioned here, these mentioned incidents are there, but with those incidents are the asanid, right, the isnad. So these isnads can be checked, right, and have been checked, right. So again, you cannot say that these are da'if, right, but these are actually like any other hadith. And the incidents that I mentioned in terms of the method, right, that a person went out into society, these things are actually tawatur in meaning, right. So it's not a matter of dispute. Anyway, it's a specific incident that people may disagree. So did Rasulullah go to Banu Kalb? This specific incident, someone might have issue with. But the fact that Rasulullah went to so many tribes is agreed upon. No one will disagree. So the fact that Prophet engaged in the intellectual struggle, if you go through the method now, is qat'i, not by the Sunnah only, but by the Quranic text. Because the Quran challenged Quraysh in so many places, sometimes even naming them. Right? So it's a decisive matter in terms of the intellectual struggle that Rasulullah engaged in. The fact that he challenged the rulers is qat'i, not just by the Seerah works, but even by the Quranic text as well. أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُ الْيَتِيمِ. This ayah, Surah Ma'un, was revealed regarding the Quraysh who used to mistreat the orphans. Tabbat Yada was revealed regarding Abu Lahab. The fact that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he went to the tribes and sought Nusra is well established, right? Because he went to so many tribes, and it is tawatur in terms of the fact that he presented himself to the tribes, right? The specific tribes people may disagree, but the fact that he went to the tribes is not disputed. You see, so if you look at the method, the aspects of the method are actually qat'i, are definite, and they're not disputed. What they mean, someone may disagree about exactly the significance of it. But the fact that Rasulullah, he followed this path, that he engaged in the intellectual struggle, that he engaged in the political struggle, and that he sought the Nusra, and he transferred the authority, and that the fact that he established the Islamic State in Medina is a qat'i matter over which there is no dispute.
The brother in the blue shirt.
Assalamu alaikum, brother. I'd like to ask a question that isn't this work to establish the Khilafah for Kifaya, and how is the individual responsible for this work?
Okay. The work to re-establish the Khilafah is actually for Kifaya and Ayn at the same time. Let me explain. To appoint a Khalifa is Kifaya, right? That is why in the time of Abu Bakr and that when they appointed him as Khalifa, not everyone gave bay'ah physically. It's only some people in Medina, the Ahlul Halli wal Aqd, those who represented the Muslims, they gave him the bay'ah, and that was sufficient for all. So that's the ijma' to say that it's fard kifaya, that some people can appoint. However, to have a Khalifa present is actually fardu ayn. How do we know that? The hadith that I quoted before is clear. When he said, Man mata, the one who dies, walaysa fi unuqihi bay'ah, and he does not have a bay'ah on his neck, mata mitatan jahiliya, right? And he will die the death of jahiliya. Obviously, the death of jahiliya is a qarina to show the obligation of having a Khalifa present. How is this fardu ayn? He said, Man mata, death. The death, brothers, is never collective. It's always singular. You die your own death. So the one who dies with a bay'ah on his neck, he is the one who will die the death of jahiliyyah. So there's an obligation on you to ensure the presence of a Khalifa. So the obligation to have a Khalifa present by ishara now, right? Ishara of the text indicates the obligation to work for his presence as well. So it's clear, it's not only an obligation on some people, but rather it's an obligation on all Muslims. Even if one says that it is kifaya, If it is, that is kifaya. We all know that kifaya becomes, if it's not fulfilled, right, everyone is sinful. So that means it is an obligation on all Muslims. So for example, if we're a group of Muslims here and someone comes and gives salam to us, it's kifaya to give salam back. It's fard to reply, as we know, but it's kifaya to give back. So it means some people can give. If none gave, all would be sinful, indicating his obligation on all. Do you see? So until the obligation is fulfilled, it's on all. So that's what the definition of fard kifaya is. Ma, aqama bihil ba'd. The obligation which some have fulfilled, not some are fulfilling. It's been fulfilled. So unless and until the Khilafah is fulfilled or is implemented, right, established, it remains an obligation on every neck.
It's the brother in the front.
I just need a clarification of your talk. You mentioned that how Muhammad rose to warn mankind, and we also mentioned that Allah commanded Muhammad to take his people out when they were strong. Shouldn't we first be working to make the Muslims strong, strengthening their iman, making them perfect the whole of the ummah before we can go out and take this work and challenging the leaders?
Okay, this understanding is not accurate. It's wrong for many reasons. First of all, the duty to rectify oneself and purify oneself and strengthen ourselves is an obligation, nothing to do with the Khilafah, but rather is a constant obligation whether Khilafah exists or not. So for example, prayer, right? Prayer is an obligation whether there is a Khilafah or not. Right? It's a continuous obligation. So we need to pray. And it has no linkage to that obligation. It's a separate obligation. So purifying ourselves is an obligation that all Muslims have. Right? And it's not linked to, this is not the method to establish the Khilafah. But rather it's an obligation that is there even when the Khilafah is there. Right? First point. Second point is, if you look at what the Prophet ﷺ did, his Sahaba will agree that they had the strongest iman. But did they stop? Did they just in Darul Arqam perfect their iman, perfect themselves and keep on ascending, and that's all they did? Why did Rasulullah ﷺ take them out into society, right? To attack the thoughts and ideas in society and they were stoned. Right? They were boycotted for 3 years in Shi'ab of Ibn Abdul Muttalib. Why? If the iman was the way. No. Iman is what gives you the strength to fulfill your obligation. In fact, a sign of perfecting yourself would be to work to establish the Khilafah according to the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the one who does not do that, he is the one, who is actually deficient in himself. And so for him to complete rectify himself, he needs to follow that methodology. And finally, although there's many points one can make, if that is the condition of working or having a Khilafah, why is it that the Prophet ﷺ established a Khilafah, right, even though his Sahaba were only not more than 300 people? How is it the case? How is the case that in Medina that the Prophet ﷺ, he established the state and the majority were kuffar? There were munafiqeen roaming around everywhere, isn't it? That's why in Surah At-Tawbah so many ayahs revealed regarding the munafiqeen. Even a surah, the surah munafiqeen. Who are they? These are the people in Medina, isn't it? Right? You had kuffar, munafiqeen, all sorts. But the issue is that the dominant opinion was for Islam. So it wasn't that every single individual had to be perfect. And this is not the sunnah of Rasulullah ﷺ. The sunnah of Rasulullah is to prepare the public opinion, right, and is to follow the examples that I listed. And this issue is something which is ongoing and is actually not dependent or conditional on the subject of Khilafah.
Yes, bro.
Assalamu alaikum. Currently we see that the Muslim Ummah is so disunited, and there are over 55 different Muslim countries, and in each one of these countries there are different regimes, such as monarchy, dictatorship and martial law. So is it really possible to unite all these countries under one leadership of Islam?
Okay. This, first of all, before even giving the answer, what I want to say is this concept that we are not able to unite. What is the source? the source is actually the West. You see, the Orientalist attack, right, when it started on the Muslim Ummah, they wanted to make sure that the Muslims never unite. So they spread the ideas that, look, the Islamic land, there's so many languages, right? There's so many, different cultures, that the Muslims can never unite. So this concept is actually politically motivated, first of all. In terms of how can the Muslims unite, history is a testament to that. If we look at the Muslim Ummah is not composed of Arabs. The Muslim Ummah is composed of many many sort of ethnicities, many languages, all shapes and colors, and they were all united under one aqidah. And this is the point, that the Islamic aqidah can unite whatever language you speak, right? It can unite the people under one banner. That's why we find Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his Sahaba, there were many types. Suhaib al-Rumi was from Rome, right? Bilal al-Habashi who was from Abyssinia, Abu Zahra al-Ghaffari. So many people. And we find the Islamic State as well after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It covered the Arab lands, it covered the Balkans, it covered Asia, parts of Asia, and it covered all of these lands and was able to unite them. Why? Because the Muslims were united on one aqidah, which gave them one focus and made them accept one system. So it is possible for the Muslims to unite again, because the Islamic aqidah is a basis on which the Muslims unite.
The brother right at the back. Assalamu alaikum. You discussed the method of the Prophet and to re-establish the Khilafah. In any part of the method, did he ever compromise Islam? And can you give any examples to prove that he didn't do that when it came to the Quraysh?
Okay, Jazakallah khair. You see, the Prophet he followed a fixed method. He did not chop and change and make things along the way, but rather he followed the wahi. So just as the ayah said, وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ, he does not say anything of his own. He follows the wahi. In his actions as well, he said, إِنْ أَتَّبِعُ إِلَّا مَا يُوحَى إِلَيَّ, that I only follow the wahi. You see, and so the Prophet we find in his life that he stuck to the wahi and he never compromised, even though the opportunity for compromise was there. So for example, when the Quraysh, they came to him and said, Ya Muhammad, we'll give you an option, right? أَن تَعْبُدُ إِلَهَنَا سَنَةً وَنَعْبُدُ إِلَهَكَ سَنَةً, that you worship our gods, right, for 1 year, and we'll worship your God for 1 year. Right? They even threw in, they said, look, we'll give you the power and authority to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, but what did he do? He did not compromise in this, but rather the ayah was revealed, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ, that, O kafirin, O kuffar, I do not worship what you worship, and you do not worship what I worship. And the ayah continues, لَكُمْ دِينُكُمْ وَلِيَ دِينِ, you have your deen and I have mine. Again, when he went to Bani Amir ibn Sa'sa'a, they were willing to give him power. But Rasulullah he did not take the power. Why? Because they put a condition that they will take the power after him. And he rejected that. So today, just because a certain government may give us a post, right, in a portfolio, right, to share power, will not compromise, because this is not something which is allowed in Islam and is not from the Islamic methodology. So we need to adhere to the example of the Prophet ﷺ and remain firm and steadfast on the path that he has outlined.
Okay, the brother there.
Why don't we hear about the issue of establishing Khilafah from the majority of the scholars, or from the imams of the mosques, or from our madrasas?
Okay, Jazakallah khair. To be honest with you, why? Because if you look at the period of decline, right, after the Khilafah was destroyed, right, that the Muslims, they started to just focus on the solutions of Islam, and they neglected the method of applying the solution of Islam, which was the Khilafah. So what happened was, when the Khilafah was destroyed, the Muslims started to just talk about the solution like prayer, fasting, Hajj, Zakat, and these things. So the ulama today, they write books on Salah, They write books on Hajj, but they do not write books on taxation. They do not write books on Khilafah. Why? Because after the Khilafah was destroyed, their focus unfortunately became the individual aspects of Islam, and they neglected that. In fact, this is a matter which is well known amongst the ulama, as I said. So, for example, amongst the Ahnaf, if you look at Abu Hanifa, he lived under the Khalifa. His students were Qadis. Right? Abu Yusuf, Qadi Abu Yusuf was the Qadi, al-Quda in the Islamic State. So it's well established, amongst the four schools of thought. We only need to refer to Imam Jazai's Fiqh al-Madhahib al-Arba'a, the fiqh of the four schools of thought. And in the section, if you go to wudu, he'll give you four schools of thought, isn't it? That, this is tayammum, as the four schools of thought. If you go to the section on Imama in that book, and the section of Imama, he says that all four schools are agreed there is an obligation to have an Imam. So it's not disputed. Only point is, unfortunately, the focus has gone because the Khilafah was destroyed. So we need to bring that focus back again, inshallah, Aziz.
Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions, inshallah. Yes, Ibrahim.
Assalamu alaikum. When I discuss your methodology of establishing the Khilafah, from what I understand from reading the Seerah of the Prophet, we see that Islam came revealed gradually, it's not just in one whole. So what we see now in the society, it's very difficult to establish a Khilafah or Sharia in one go. We have to go through the methodology for understanding, because Allah chose to reveal Quran gradually, Rasulullah implemented gradually. What don't we through the same method?
Okay, Jazakallah khair. Okay, if we go back to the life of Rasulullah and scrutinize what happened, we will find that the Prophet ﷺ, he never implemented anything gradually. Rather, what was gradual was the revelation, not the application. So soon as a hukum was revealed, the application was swift, right? And it was immediate. To the extent, for example, when the change of Qibla came, the application was in the Salah. So the Sahaba anhum, they were making Salah towards Al-Quds, right? And when the hukum came, the Qibla should change. They did not even wait to finish the Salah. They changed the Qibla in the Salah itself. So the Prophet ﷺ, he never, implemented the rules gradually, but rather it was revealed gradually. So the qiyas, the analogy is wrong. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to reveal it gradually, right? So to make analogy between his action, his revelation, and us in terms of implementation is wrong. Rather, we have been obliged to implement forthwith. So for example, the ayah said, فَحْكُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهِ, that you should rule by whatever Allah has revealed. مَا الْعُمُومِ. So whatever means all of what Allah has revealed, you should implement. And it's not gradual. As for those who say that, look, alcohol, give an example, that alcohol was revealed gradually, we'll find that in fact the legislation was not gradual, right? So the first ayah which talks about, which says that that al-khamru wal-maysiru, that the in alcohol and gambling, right? Fihima manafi', that there are some benefit, but the evil outweighs. This ayah did not actually prohibit alcohol. It's just describing a reality, right? Why? Because we know the Sahaba, they continued to drink alcohol even after this ayah was revealed. The second ayah was not relating to the prohibition of alcohol. It said, إِذَا قُمْ لَا تَقْرَبُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَأَنْتُمْ سُكَارَى حَتَّى تَعْلَمُوا مَا تَقُولُونَ, that do not approach the salah when you are drunk, right? Until you know what you are saying. So in this ayah was revealed about salah, the condition in which you should pray salah. Is not about the prohibition of alcohol. In fact, the ayah said, حَتَّى تَعْلُوا مَا تَقُولُونَ, that do not approach the salah when you're drunk, so that until you know what you are saying. That means that if you drank less and you knew what you were saying, was allowed even at that time to drink alcohol and pray, as long as you knew what you were saying. You see, so the ayah did not prohibit alcohol. The only ayah that prohibited alcohol was the ayah إِنَّمَا الْخَمْرُ وَالْمَيْسِرُ وَالْأَنْصَابُ وَالْأَزْلَامُ رِجْسٌ مِّنْ عَمَلِ الشَّيْطَانِ فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. That indeed, alcohol, idol worship, all of these things are work of the shaitan. فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ, that you should make ijtinab you should leave these things so that you will be successful. So this is the only ayah which prohibited. There is no example of gradual implementation, but rather there's an example of gradual revelation, which is different to the example of implementation which was immediate, as we saw in the time of Rasulullah.
Okay, the brother with the dark blue shirt.
A couple of months ago, I was speaking to a brother, and what he said was that we need to fight jihad against the rulers, and only then will the Khilafah be established. He also said that the Muslims in Makkah were few in number, that's why they didn't fight jihad, and today we have many Muslims. What would you say about this?
Okay, Jazakallah khair. Again, we need to go back to the text. What is jihad? Jihad is defined by the ulama is مقاتلة الكافرين لإعلاء كلمة الله عز وجل دفعا أو طلبا. It is to fight the kuffar, right? It is to fight the kuffar on the battlefield, either defend the Islamic state or the Islamic lands, or to seek or to extend talaba, right? To extend the Islamic land. So to defend the Islamic state and to expand the Islamic state is a different issue to establishing the Islamic state. So therefore the method of jihad actually is nothing to do with establishing an Islamic state, right? Because its definition, its reality is to actually defend the state, right? And to expand the state. And we find that Rasulullah ﷺ, he never used this method. There's only one time that the Islamic State was destroyed, which was in his time, and he actually, prevented the Sahaba from using any material force. When Abdurrahman ibn Auf came to him and he said, "Ya Rasulullah, kunna fi jahiliya azza, wa fil Islami adillah." He said, in Jahiliyyah we were people who had honor and dignity, but in Islam now we become people who are humiliated because obviously the Quraysh are torturing them. Can we not use weapons? The Prophet said, "Inni umirtu bil afu, la tuqatilu al-qawm." This is hadith in An-Nasa'i and in Hakim's Mustadrak. He said, I have been commanded to be forgiving, so do not fight the people. In another occasion, right, when some Sahaba said, "Let us fight," he said, "La nu'maru bi dhalik." He said, we've not been commanded to fight. That the Prophet ﷺ did not use the method of fighting to establish the state. So that is not the relevant text to re-establish the Islamic State. The relevant text is the example that we gave, which to work with a political party which engages in society to change the thoughts and ideas in that society, and which seeks the nusra. And so this is the method of the Prophet ﷺ, and not jihad.
Jazakallah khair, brothers. Inshallah, we have time just for one more question, but quickly, inshallah.
Okay, if you look today, at the Muslims in the world today, and you notice that recently there was a bombing in America. Since then, not just in America, worldwide, there's a massive onslaught against the Muslims. It's very hard today, in today's day and age, to hold to Islam. And surely, if you look at what the Quran and Allah says very clearly, that it does not burden the soul more than it can bear. So surely, from this, there is maneuverability, some flexibility that we can have in terms of the methodology. So surely we can use a bit more hikmah. Example, we can enter like democracy, to bring about change. And surely there must be more flexible methods, which we can utilize to bring about change, as opposed to the very strict methodology that Muhammad sallallahu embarked upon himself.
Okay, to say that the example of the Prophet ﷺ, or the method that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given is not practical, but we can ourselves devise a method which is practical, is a great sin, and something is a great thing against Allah, to say against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He knows our reality. So the solution that He gives is not time bound. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is no past, present or future. So the solution that He gives for His servant is also limitless and is also fitting to His reality. So our reality today, right, of where we do not have an Islamic authority, the example that the Prophet has given us, the example that the revelation has given us, this is actually the most practical method of all, right? Because this is coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But rather, we shouldn't be the way in which we should be discussing practicality is, look, we know the method, right? The issue is practically now how to implement the method, not to devise a method from our minds ourselves. In fact, if we look at the reality, even from the reality we'll find is the most practical. And even from the reality we'll find that those who claim to be practical, their method is the most impractical of all. So those who say we should have hikmah and join the government, right? This is the most, impractical way of establishing Khilafah that ever was, even from a reality point of view. Because we know that those who have authority, right, in the Muslim lands, the parliaments are only a talking shop. They have no power whatsoever. So for you to go there and take power does not mean anything. The fact that these regimes open up, right, posts and give to Islamic groups indicates something, which is that why are they doing this? They do this because they know this is a way to contain the Islamic groups, right? To get them within the political process, and thereby they now have to adhere to the rules of the game, which now the rulers have placed. You see? And if, for example, they do win, the army will always come in. So, for example, Algeria, we found that the army came in when the Muslims were on the verge of winning. We know, for example, in Turkey, right, that an Islamic party did go to power, but still was able to achieve nothing because those who had power, i.e. the Ahlul Nusra, people who had Nusra, did not give that authority. So we found Arbakan, for example, did what his predecessor did, exactly the same, if not more. So, for example, he continued the military maneuvers with Israel, right? He strengthened his relationship with the West and with NATO and with the EU at that time. And even then, the generals were not happy and they kicked him out. Do you see? So even from a reality point of view, the method of Rasulullah is the most practical. And the examples that they give, of which not accord with the Sharia, are the most impractical. For us, this action is a worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we don't look in this regard. Rather, we take the method and we think of the practical way of implementing it. And that's the way that the Muslim should think about this matter.
Okay, Jazakumullah khair, brothers, for attending. We have run out of time today, but I'd like to ask Kamal, inshallah, to end this session with a dua, inshallah.
Allahumma ameen. ربنا إننا سمعنا مناديا ينادي للإيمان أن آمنوا بربكم فآمنا ربنا فاغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.